Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a fascinating stack of sources here that you provided, giving us a really close look into a specific corner of American politics.
That's right.
Specifically, the world of a Republican county chair in Georgia and, well, the complex dynamics she navigates.
Exactly. These materials offer such a rich view, at the intersection of grassroots activism, party machinery, and national political currents.
Yeah.
All seen through the eyes of one individual, Sally Grubbs.
So our mission today is really to unpack what's happening at this very ground level. We want to understand the motivations, the frustrations maybe, and the strategies driving this part of the political landscape, and then see how that local party action connects to the much bigger picture.
Right.
What kinds of events, tensions, and strategies are shaping things, and ultimately, what can that tell us about where things might be headed?
Yeah, exactly. We'll be pulling out the key insights, some surprising facts maybe, and the underlying feelings described in this material to give you a clear sense of what's really going on here.
Okay, let's dive in then. Starting with the central figure in these sources, Sally Grubbs. She's the chair of the Cobb County GOP, which, we're told, has the most Republican voters in the state.
Right.
And the material opens with her clearly thrilled, anticipating Donald Trump speaking at the state convention. She even texted happy 30 times.
Wow. Yeah, and her personal journey here, it provides such a compelling entry point. She started as a grassroots activist and then became an insider as county chair. But that shift, well, as described in the sources, it involved a steep learning curve and some pretty significant personal challenges.
Absolutely. The sources detail a really tough year leading up to this convention. Back in 2022, there were what she saw as significant glitches in the primary election.
Glitches.
Yeah, things like issues with ballots, poll pads, tabulation tapes, stuff she reported.
Okay.
Even though officials reportedly said the election ran smoothly, she felt it was, quote, a hot mess.
A hot mess. Yeah, this is where we really see her frustration with the system,
Yeah.
and her questioning of the official narrative starting to build.
Right.
Her preferred candidates, David Perdue and Jody Hice, both endorsed by Trump, they lost to incumbents Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger.
Okay.
And in her view, they ran by actively avoiding the MAGA label.
Interesting.
She reportedly blamed crossover voters for these losses, even though, well, analyses didn't really support that idea.
Right.
We're even told she revisited an old HBO documentary about electronic voting machine tampering around this time.
And then there was the campaigning for Herschel Walker, the Trump-backed Senate candidate.
Yeah.
The sources describe her kind of rationalizing controversies around him, like the reports about him paying for an abortion. She's quoted saying, there's no absolute proof, and focusing more on the woman involved, or viewing Walker himself as a sinner saved by grace given his troubled past.
Right, that framing.
Yeah, and she also reportedly expressed disdain for more moderate Republicans, like Jeff Duncan appearing on CNN.
Despite all that effort, all that enthusiasm, Walker lost the runoff.
He did.
And the sources highlight this loss and her reaction to some young staffers she felt weren't committed enough, which seems to have just, solidified her resolve to work even harder within the party.
And here's where it gets particularly intense on a personal level, according to the sources. She apparently had a terrible year.
Yeah.
Including her son's severe motorcycle accident where he was critically injured.
Awful.
And this personal crisis was compounded by rumors circulating, reportedly aimed at undermining her position as chair.
Wow. Yet the material shows she decided to stick with it. She was visibly moved when she was reelected by acclamation at her county convention.
Yeah.
This whole experience seems to have both deepened her commitment and her understanding of the, let's say, the complexities and difficulties of party leadership.
You can really see that evolution described. The sources detail her learning from past mistakes, like the backlash she faced from her own party committee's censure resolution against Governor Kemp back in 2021.
Right, that's censure.
She reportedly realized that formal censures often just shut down conversation, and that leadership required being, well, more strategic.
Left blunt force.
Exactly. By the time of this convention, she sees herself as more of an insider, acknowledging that things are much more complicated than they might look from the outside,
Right.
with lots of unintended consequences.
Okay, so with that background on Sally, let's shift to the state convention itself in Columbus.
Okay.
The sources describe it as a historic mill town turned college town. And the material makes it clear this wasn't just a standard party gathering.
No.
It was really a battleground reflecting deeper ideological rifts within the party.
The scale and atmosphere were definitely boosted by Trump's expected appearance, which increased attendance.
Yeah.
But beneath the surface, there was significant tension. The sources note that while Georgia voters had pushed back against Trump in the midterms by re-electing Kemp and Raffensperger,
Right, the voters did.
the state party organization itself was described as being disproportionately, overwhelmingly MAGA-so.
That's a key distinction. And it created a stark divide at the convention.
Yeah.
The material points out the outgoing state chair, David Schaefer's, involvement with the alternate electors scheme after 2020, that planned to submit alternative slates of electors for Trump.
Right, which is now under investigation.
Exactly. Meanwhile, Governor Kemp actively distanced himself from the convention, skipped it entirely, formed his own political committee.
Wow.
And Secretary of State Raffensperger reportedly wasn't even invited.
Ouch. Okay, so a key player pushing the MAGA agenda at the convention was the Georgia Republican Assembly, or GRA.
The GRA,
Yeah.
an outside activist group, roots going back to Barry Goldwater, apparently.
Right. And the sources detail their two main priorities for the convention rules.
Okay, what were they?
Well, first, they wanted to empower grassroots volunteers by prioritizing them as delegates over traditional elected officials.
Okay. Give the base more power.
Exactly. And Sally, despite now being an insider, reportedly supported this. She saw it as a key way to give newer people a voice in the party.
Makes sense from her background. And the second
thing was the GRA pushed for what they called an accountability rule.
accountability rule.
Yeah. What's particularly interesting here is that this rule, as described, would allow state party delegates to effectively veto the winner of a primary election.
Veto the primary winner.
Wow.
Yeah.
Preventing them from appearing on the Republican ballot line.
So this was widely understood then, according to the sources,
Yeah.
as a direct shot at Kemp and Raffensperger.
Pretty much.
A way for the party apparatus to enforce ideological compliance. Some saw it as a logical extension of the precinct strategy that pushed to get activists into low-level party positions.
Right. But the sources show Sally herself was reportedly skeptical of this rule.
Oh, interesting. Why?
She worried it would override the will of voters, and could easily be abused by other factions down the line.
Pragmatic concerns.
Yeah. And the sources give us this ringside seat to the Rules Committee meeting where this was debated.
Okay.
Alex Johnson, the GRA president, is described arguing passionately for maintaining the party's brand and having delegates decide who determines what a Republican is.
Defining the brand.
But other committee members raised some very pragmatic objections, according to the material.
Like what?
Like likely legal challenges, expensive fees, the state legislature may be overturning the rule.
Oh, yeah, like they reportedly did for Kemp's PAC.
Exactly. And the fundamental issue, right, a few thousand delegates overriding potentially millions of primary voters.
That's a big one.
One member is quoted joking, "We can't get 20 Republicans to agree on anything."
Probably true.
And another reportedly questioned, who determines if you're Republican enough? So ultimately, the rule was rejected. Only Alex Johnson voted for it.
Wow. So it failed decisively in committee.
Yeah. Now, stepping into the exhibition hall, that offered another snapshot of the movement's interests, according to the sources.
Okay, what kind of stuff was there?
Well, booths for promoting paper ballots, lots of Trump swag, like not guilty shirts, and get this, Trump-shaped honey bottles.
Trump-shaped honey.
Oh, hyperbaric chamber clinic, a neo-impressionist artist, the John Birch Society.
John Birch Society, still
Yeah.
around.
Apparently.
Yeah.
And even a Ron DeSantis super PAC booth staffed by Sally's predecessor as county chair.
Oh, wow. That really highlights the diverse elements, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes competing interests within this broader conservative MAGA coalition at the ground level.
Definitely.
The material also detailed a strong focus on election fraud, with sessions led by figures like Seth Keshel and Garland Favorito, who's described kind of humorously as an election fraud hipster.
An election fraud hipster.
Okay.
Attendees shared personal stories and concerns, too.
Like,
Sam Carnline is quoted recalling Sally's testimony about seeing a shredding truck after the 2020 election. And Richard Schroeder reportedly noticed a shift from what he saw as secure black bags with 2 zippers and wire ties for ballots to less secure gray bags with just 1 zipper in 2022, which he viewed as eliminating the chain of custody. These specific details really stick with people.
yeah, they paint a picture of their concerns. Now, what's fascinating here is the reported shift in strategy that seemed to emerge from these discussions.
That's a shift in strategy.
Yeah, the focus seems to be moving from solely election integrity meaning preventing fraud, towards ballot chasing, sometimes called Unite the Right.
Ballot chasing, like harvesting.
Kind of learning from Democrats is how it's described. Catherine James is quoted describing this new initiative as using data to target marginal or new GOP voters, aiming for a national rollout.
Okay.
She reportedly cited Catherine Engelbrecht from 2000 Mules on the need for Republicans to show up in overwhelming numbers because, and this is a quote, they just can't cheat too much.
They just can't cheat too much.
Yeah. The key insight here is this strategic evolution in the movement's approach to winning elections. It's moving from just focusing on preventing fraud to actively boosting their own turnout using methods they see the opposition using effectively.
Right, a proactive strategy. So, okay, just before the convention was set to climax with Trump's speech, a huge piece of news dropped, according to the sources.
Yeah.
The first federal indictment against Donald Trump, specifically regarding classified documents.
Oh, wow. Right before his speech. How did people react?
Well, the sources do a great job capturing the immediate reaction among attendees. Sally is quoted feeling just a wave of sadness.
Sadness.
Yeah, believing the country was losing what made it America. She reportedly said it felt like the body's dead, but it hasn't quit twitching, and asked if someone had read 1984.
Heavy stuff. And others?
Friends texted her saying it was insane, that everything Trump had been saying felt true now. One friend reportedly went as far as comparing Trump to Jesus Christ.
Wow.
Calling him the most persecuted man since Jesus Christ.
That's quite a comparison. Did Sally agree?
The material notes she didn't fully agree with that specific comparison. She stated, I love President Trump, but I don't worship him. He's not a god. He's a man.
Right.
However, she did see him, according to the sources, as a very powerful symbol.
A symbol of what?
For Sally, he was a symbol of standing up for the little guy against power-hungry forces that wanted to crush American freedom.
Okay.
She reportedly understood his, quote, "They're not coming after me, they're coming after you, and I'm just standing in the way," even though she knew others scoffed at it.
Right.
The core insight here seems to be how this perceived attack on Trump is internalized by supporters as an attack on themselves and their values.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it resonates deeply with this sense of fear described in the sources.
Fear.
Yeah, a feeling that if the government could weaponize its power against Trump, former president, with all his resources, what chance did an average person stand? Sally is quoted, knowing people who were targeted for involvement in events around January 6th, which she saw as them exercising their rights, and she reportedly felt like she herself had a target on her back just for being politically active as chair.
That's a powerful feeling. And this perspective was echoed by many others there, based on the material.
Like who?
Lori Wood is quoted seeing the charges as a hit job by the Washington swamp. Sam Carnline reportedly linked the indictment directly to Trump trying to get fair elections in Georgia, and he dismissed actions around January 6th as not serious, described as more than a broomstick and an umbrella.
Minimizing January 6th.
Yeah. And Jim Tolley and Orion Roy reportedly saw it as an attempt to intimidate the American conservative who they felt was about to erupt.
About to erupt, okay. And Jackie Harling, the new chair from Walker County.
She's quoted stating, "Literally nothing shocks me anymore, seeing the indictment as proof it actually was a witch hunt." Yeah. She argued it only invalidates the people pursuing Trump, making him look better, putting him on a pedestal, making him a martyr.
The martyrdom narrative again.
Right. She reportedly felt the truth was coming out and that, quote, "Every official narrative from every government organization since COVID has been proven untrue."
Wow. Every single one.
That's the quote, which, as she saw it, led directly to this widespread distrust of traditional information sources within this group.
That's a key insight. The connection between the indictment, the feeling of martyrdom, and this deep systemic distrust.
Exactly. Meanwhile, over at a cigar party, radio host John Fredericks reportedly declared, "Game on."
Game on.
Yeah, saying, "Indict away. Every indictment, we get more emboldened. We get stronger. We get more votes."
So leaning into it.
Totally. He saw this as part of a larger, complete takeover of a major state Republican Party by MAGA forces, calling it a MAGA revolution, and a blueprint for taking over state parties and eventually the RNC.
A blueprint. And he linked this back to the precinct strategy.
Directly, stating that the delegates present were all MAGD, they're all Trump.
Okay.
He reportedly saw the absence of figures like Kemp, Raffensperger, DeSantis, and Pence from the convention as concrete proof that it was a MAGA route.
A MAGA route. Strong word.
Yeah. Now, amidst all these larger political currents and reactions, the sources bring us back to Sally's personal journey and efforts at the convention itself.
Right. She was running for something.
She was. She was involved in the nominating committee and also decided to run for Over 80's chairman.
Over 80's chairman? What does that mean?
It's apparently a pretty significant leadership role covering 32 counties and the majority of the state's population.
Okay, so a big deal within the state party structure.
Yeah. And running for this position required her to campaign directly among her peers there at the convention.
Right.
Her speech, as described in the sources, really shows her navigating the different factions present.
Oh.
She reportedly acknowledged being called far-right, something she hated, and clarified her position instead as an America First conservative.
Okay. Defining her terms.
She emphasized the crucial need for these large counties to work together, stressing the fundamental importance of solid, reliable, county-level party work.
Getting back to basics.
Exactly. She's quoted stating clearly that nobody's going to come to save us, and that they had to save themselves by relying on each other.
Self-reliance at the county level.
And she also explicitly distanced herself from being solely aligned with one group, like the Frost Bucket, apparently associated with some GRA leadership, while also saying she could get along with people from groups like the Log Cabin Republicans.
The LGBTQ plus Republican group.
Right. Arguing that politics of personal belief shouldn't interfere with their shared job of building the party.
Interesting balancing act. Did it work?
It did. The sources detailed the vote counting reportedly done with paper ballots.
Of course.
Drawing a joke about how long results would take and a comparison to a tribal council on the show Survivor.
Huh. Okay. And the result?
Sally won the election 18-8.
Pretty decisive.
Yeah. And what's particularly humanizing and insightful here is her reaction afterward, as captured in the sources.
What was it like?
It's described as this mix of gratitude, thank you, but also a sense of overwhelm.
Understandable.
Like, I'm an idiot for taking on even more work, but also immense pride, saying she'd never felt so loved.
That's quite a moment.
And she also reportedly made a strategic point to reach out to those who didn't vote for her, promising to win them over.
Showing that learning curve we talked about earlier in action. Smart.
Definitely. And then came the moment she was really waiting for, according to the sources.
Meeting with Trump?
The VIP meeting and photo opportunity with President Trump. The material describes the detailed process involved, Secret Service checks, the line of attendees waiting.
The whole setup.
She describes the experience vividly in the sources. There was that surreal feeling of being, in her words, nobody.
No, but...
A single mother raising 2 kids, caring for family, now suddenly standing there with the former president. She recalled past interactions, like a phone call he reportedly made when she was first elected county chair, and him sending her a gift box of swag.
Yeah.
She felt he truly remembered her, which was a personal connection she deeply valued. Especially, she noted, contrasted with getting just a form letter from the Nixon White House when she was a girl.
That personal touch matters. What did she say to him?
The material says she used her brief time with him to tell him her worries about the Republican ground game for 2024.
The practical stuff.
And that they needed help. To this, he reportedly responded he would get them what they needed and even called over Marjorie Taylor Greene to meet her.
Wow. Called MTG over.
Yeah. And this interaction is a key insight from the sources because it explicitly contrasts with the view held by some critics who believe Trump only takes from his supporters.
Right. This felt different to her.
For Sally, this specific experience felt like significant validation and empowerment. She described it as one of the happiest days of her life, alongside major family events.
That's powerful.
Okay.
Let's zoom back out now. The sources connect Sally's local world and the dynamics we saw at the Georgia Convention to the broader strategies of the MAGA movement, particularly Steve Bannon's vision.
Right. Bannon's perspective comes in here.
Yeah. Bannon reportedly watching events like the House fight over the government shutdown from his, quote, Breitbart Embassy Command Center. He saw these granular political battles as a direct result of the precinct strategy.
How so?
He felt it was empowering activists who are now, in his view, so savvy about things like parliamentary procedures and appropriations bills.
Savvy.
A level of sophistication he felt the Tea Party movement never quite reached.
Interesting comparison. And he saw figures like Matt Gaetz using the narrow House majority effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Effective precisely because of this newfound grassroots engagement and understanding of process. The sources even describe Bannon plotting with Gates via phone to file the motion to vacate against McCarthy.
Plotting the ouster.
Yeah, reportedly calling it historic and seeing it as taking things apart.
Taking things apart. That sounds like a theme.
It is. Bannon's perspective, as described in the material, is one of a MAGA revolution, where the initial goal is to take down the Republican Party establishment, using Trump as their instrument.
Oh, okay. Take down first.
Right. He reportedly acknowledged the movement was currently focused on taking things apart before they could rebuild institutions later.
And he saw it as a binary fight.
Totally. Zero sum. Quote, "One side's going to win and one side's going to lose. No compromise here."
Wow. And the sources also highlight how this precinct strategy, or a similar inside game, was reportedly benefiting Trump's campaign for 2024 directly.
Yeah, by influencing state party rules regarding primaries and caucuses in places like Nevada, Michigan, California, and embedding Trump supporters as caucus captains in Iowa. So practical impacts on the nomination process.
Right. However, the sources point to a potential weakness in this populist takeover.
Oh, what's that?
State party finances.
Money. Always comes back to money.
Yep. By alienating traditional business interests described as being unclubbable, MAGA-led state parties in Georgia, Michigan, Arizona were reportedly facing financial drains.
Okay.
Sometimes from legal costs, like for the alternate elector scheme. And this could potentially hamper key initiatives like that ballot chasing we talked about.
Right. So a potential trade-off between ideological purity or takeover and practical party functions like fundraising and campaigning. Did Bannon acknowledge this?
He reportedly did, but saw it more as a motivator for the insurgents, like a challenge to overcome.
Okay. Another challenge highlighted is the internal conflict within the party itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The sources mention issues like Georgia State Senator Colton Moore reportedly being suspended from the Senate Republican caucus for attacking colleagues over the Fani Willis situation.
Right, the Fulton County DA.
The investigation into efforts to overturn the 2020 election in Georgia. And Sally herself is described being called a rhino Republican in name only.
Ouch.
Yeah. And kicked out of a chat group for defending the state chair's neutrality in some matter, which she reportedly saw as self-defeating for the party. Like, why are we attacking each other?
Infighting. Yeah, that can definitely hinder things. The sources also briefly touch on Trump's potential plans for a second term, beyond just policy.
They do, mentioning things like reportedly wanting to use federal law enforcement against critics, and a plan being developed to potentially invoke the Insurrection Act on Inauguration Day. This is presented in the material as part of the broader picture, the stakes involved.
High stakes indeed. And we also see President Biden's counter-narrative presented in the sources.
Right. How's that described?
He's described as warning about MAGA extremism as a threat to democracy, citing works like How Democracies Die, and trying to connect with voters by emphasizing the need to protect democracy and, make governance work.
So a democracy versus extremism frame. How does Bannon view that, according to the sources?
Well, Bannon reportedly viewed Biden's focus on MAGA extremism as his only viable strategy.
Only viable strategy. Why?
Because Bannon felt Biden's policies weren't benefiting people's lives in tangible ways. He's quoted contrasting Biden's speaking style with Trump's ability to connect emotionally, hitting the solar plexus, as he put it.
The solar plexus?
Yeah, which Bannon believes is key to building a winning coalition of workers across different demographics.
That's too up.
That emotional connection.
Got it. And the sources wrap up this section by discussing the aftermath of the McCarthy ouster in the House and the election of Mike Johnson as Speaker, who was immediately branded by Democrats as a MAGA extremist and reportedly celebrated by Trump.
Right, MAGA Mike.
Yeah. So ultimately, the material emphasizes the significant uncertainty of the future landscape.
Uncertainty seems like the key word. Will this MAGA Mike branding stick? Will the attacks on MAGA Republicans generally be effective with Trump himself on the ballot?
Good questions.
And what will be the unpredictable impact of Trump's ongoing legal battles, which were so clearly a focal point, an energizing force even, at that convention?
Wow, yeah.
This deep dive into your sources has certainly given us an incredibly detailed look at the current landscape. From the very personal experiences and motivations of a county chair like Sally, all the way up to the national strategic thinking shaping the political right, like Bannon's perspective.
We've really seen the blend of, deeply held beliefs, pragmatic strategic maneuvering, and these powerful emotional responses that seem to characterize this movement at different levels.
Yeah.
The specific anecdotes and quotes from your material really brought these dynamics to life in a way that just reading headlines doesn't capture.
It highlights so clearly how national political figures and major events directly impact the daily experiences and the motivations of people working at that grassroots local party level.
Absolutely.
It's not abstract for them at all.
And it shows the ongoing tensions between different visions for the Republican Party's future and how individuals like Sally navigate those sometimes conflicting pressures while trying to build something they believe in. So what does all of this mean for you, the listener, taking this all in?
Well, I think it means that understanding today's political environment really requires looking beyond just the national headlines. You need to consider the specific strategies being deployed, the energy at the grassroots, the internal conflicts happening within the parties, and especially the personal stories and deep beliefs that drive political action on the ground.
And it raises, I think, an important question. Given the powerful forces described in these sources, the deep convictions fueling activists like Sally, and the strategic goals laid out by figures like Bannon, what does winning truly look like for these different players involved?
Right. What does success mean to each of them?
Yeah. And how might their definitions of success collide or maybe even converge in